From Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come warm yourself by the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. And I say warm yourself by the fire. We have a cold one up here in these here parts. And because of icy road conditions, I am doing the show from my home studio. So there will be no live YouTube stream. No live YouTube stream this evening. However, we will post the show to the YouTube channel, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett. It'll take a few days. And then, once we post it, or rather Ryan White posts that, we'll insert some images, some JPEG images that my guest has sent along, because he'll be referring to those in this first hour. All will make sense as the hour progresses, my friends. Let me give you a heads up. Coming up in the second hour, our dear friend Rosemary Ellen Guilley, paranormal investigator, researcher, will be here. She joins us, of course, at this time every month, and she'll join us for the full hour. And she has a new book she's co-authored with the travel psychologist Michael Bryan, and the book is The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness. That's coming up in the second hour. This first hour, I'm looking forward to this. This is fascinating. You know, we take water for granted. We open up the taps and we drink it and we splash it around. We do the dishes, but truth be told, we really don't know much about water. Well, at least I don't. Probably most of you don't. My guest knows quite a bit more, and he's going to tell us some things about water. It's incredible. Water seems to have an intelligence. It seems to have a memory. And it has, by all accounts, miraculous healing properties. We're going to talk with an inventor. He's got over 20 patents to his name. He's founded over 5 companies. He was the youngest recipient of the National Science Foundation grant at the age of 16. My word, 16. I was still wetting the bed. Well, not quite, but you get the point. Just a remarkable gentleman. And under the mentorship of a Dr. Rostrom Roy at the Arizona State and Penn State Universities, he perfected the state of water with his latest patented invention. And it's been researched by a colleague, Dr. Gerald Pollack, who concluded this water to have the highest easy water signature he's ever seen. And we'll explain what easy water is. It's also highly energetic. It's deuterium depleted and oxygenated at 102%. And I just received a sample in the mail the other day, and I've got a bottle sitting right here with me. I'm holding it in my hand. It's called Divinia, world's only pure, balanced, oxygenated, light cellular water. And a little later, we'll meet one of his clients, a veteran of the United States Air Force, who suffered radiation sickness after a plutonium leak at a national laboratory, the Idaho National Laboratory, back in 2011. And this water may well have saved his life. But first, let's get the aforementioned inventor in here, Steven Sedlmayr. Welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
Thank you very much, Richard. I love that introduction. Can I take it for my family? That was lovely. Thank you.
Well, when I said we don't know much about water, I wasn't kidding, right?
No, you were not kidding. There's going back to biblical times, there's a reason why water was holy and is holy. And going further back, if you want to go back to the age of dinosaurs, there's a real question why were those animals so much larger than they are today? And one of the very big hints is it was the water. water was a different form that it was today, and everybody takes for granted that water is the same as when water first showed up on the earth to what we drink now, and that could be further from the truth.
The water that is everywhere, the water that comes out of your tap, how is that different than the water that's in our bodies, that surrounds our cells? How does it differ?
First, the water that comes out of the tap, of course, there is no good tap water anymore. It's been fluorinated, chlorinated, polluted. It has endocrines in it. It now has nanoplastics in it. It has radiation in it. It has almost every type of contamination that there is. And so there just isn't any good water on the face of the earth anymore. And I don't care where you go. It's all been nucleated and radiated and everything else. And when we first did this, we started looking at water because this water that I had invented or came up with was so radical than the water that we drank. One of the researches that to Dr. Pollack, and Dr. Pollack had found out that when water enters into your body and it's in the plasma system, in the blood system, that it actually changes its nuclear structure slightly. It likes to have more of a charge distribution around the cell than other water does. And the reason is because that water, when it changes itself and it changes its electronic structure, is that it gives it a charge. So water in your body acts very much like a battery. And that explains why you can only live a couple days drinking water, but you can go for 30 or 40 days without eating food. The water is the battery. It's the same battery that starts, the engine in your car. Well, that water in your body actually is the start for all the chemical reactions in your body. And when that runs down, when there's no more charge, it's been used up, your cells start dying, then your liver dies, your kidney dies, that way you get foggy. That's what dehydration is. You don't have enough water to do the chemical reactions. It's that simple.
The moment you take a sip of water, then, does that water's structure change, or does it take time? The moment you introduce that water from outside into your system, does your body work its magic and change its structure, its viscosity, and so forth, its density?
No, it does not. It takes a while. It has to get in your blood plasma to do that. What happens is around any hydrophilic surface, hydrophilic meaning water-loving surface, it does this change, but that change is only about 377th millionths of an inch change, where it changes its electronic structure to become a battery. So the bulk water that you drink doesn't do that till it gets into your plasma system, into your blood system, and when it does it and it surrounds the cells, the cells are inundated by your blood plasma. When that happens, then it changes. And you just hit on a very good point, too. There's a big question about what is hydration. And I've gone to water conferences and spoke to many scientists and doctors and everything else and had them try to define hydration. And you see all these claims about water hydrates and this type of water will hydrate or that type of water hydrate. And what I found out just actually within the past month, my definition of what hydration is, did you know that if you take a red blood cell and you put it into pure water, distilled water, that red blood cell will blow up.
It'll blow up?
It will blow up because it will absorb so much water. It'll just keep getting bigger and bigger till it blows up. Well, it turns out that led me down the path of trying to figure out what was hydration. And it turns out to be a very simple medical concept that's been in front of us for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and no one could answer it. Do you know what osmolality is in your blood plasma?
I do not.
Okay. In your blood plasma, of course, you have cells, and cells are swimming around, and your liver and kidney and your whole body's made up of blood or of cells. And then you have the plasma, which flows through, which is water plus solutes, salts, enzymes, hormones, everything like that swim in this conduit of blood. Well, there's an equilibrium between the amount of solutes, or the stuff that's in water, and the interior of the cell. So there's an equilibrium. It's osmosis. Some water flows in, some water flows out with bad stuff, and it balances itself. Well, when you drink pure water, when you drink good water, what happens is you lower the osmolality of your bloodstream. And when that does, there's a basic concept that water flows from low osmolality to high osmolality. That's kind of the concept of reverse osmosis. I think you've probably heard that.
Right,
That's
sure.
how we clean water.
Yes.
Well, the same type of thing happens in your body. And so whenever you lower, by drinking pure water, you have more water and you have less solute, that ratio. What that does is that makes water go into your blood cells. And when more water is in the blood cells, it tries to balance itself out by excreting the toxins that are in there so they can filter it, plus the salts and enzymes and stuff, so there's a balance. So every time you drink good, pure water, you hydrate yourself, and that causes more of this easy water to occur. You have more water in there. You have a better chance of creating this battery, and it makes you healthier. When you drink unpure water, when you drink alkaline water, which has a lot of solutes in it, what happens is it raises the osmolality of your blood, which causes the water to flow out of the cell into the bloodstream, dehydrating you. Same reason why runners dehydrate or athletes dehydrate. What they do
All right,
is
Stephen, I have to jump in. That music is coming up, means we've got to fly away to a break. We'll come right back, continue to discuss pure water, clean water, Divinia Water, how you make it, how it can heal us. Back with more in a moment, right here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
Don't be afraid of the dark. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Welcome back. Steven Sedlmayr is with us, and we are talking about, it's Divinia Water, the world's only pure, balanced, oxygenated, light cellular water. In a few minutes, we'll bring in Ralph Stanton, a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, who was exposed to an uncontrolled release of plutonium while he was working at the Idaho National Laboratory, and consequently suffered numerous health issues. And then he crossed paths with Steven Sedlmayr and his water, and we'll tell you what happened. So a water molecule, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, H2O. Are we talking, is this the water that's inside your body? And then I want to talk to you about how your water is made or created. But the water that you've been describing in our body that surrounds our cells, that is inside our cells, is that a different phase of water? Does it have more hydrogen or more oxygen?
Actually, it doesn't have that. It's just that, like you said, there's 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And how those interact, how they bond together is very important. If I can give you an analogy, let's say there's a hockey game, and all of a sudden everybody comes together in one place, and they bond together, right? They're rooting for their team. And then all of a sudden the game's over and they leave and they go spread out again. But that's kind of what water does. Water is a very social animal, and it makes bonds for a very short time, like a trillionth of a second to a millionth of a second. Then it breaks up and it leaves again. But while it's making that those bonds, it's a very tight bond. It's like you're in there rooting for your favorite hockey team, and they're doing good, and everybody's happy and going in the right direction. Then when the game's over, everybody leaves and goes back to their own place again. But that's what water does, but on a very fast, trillionth of a second type of time domain. So when it does also, if we also say when you're sitting right next to another person in the hockey game, you can touch them and yell and pat each other on the back. That indicates a very strong bond. Now, if those seats were about 6 feet apart, you would still feel a bond. You'd look over and wave at the guy and say, yeah, and that sort of stuff. But that bond wouldn't be as close. You wouldn't be as close. So water, when it gets into a cell, it changes itself and it becomes what I might call looser. What that means is that the hydrogen and oxygen tend to want to be able to break apart easier. And because they can break apart easier, then you have an oxygen. Of course, oxygen is known as an oxidizer. That's what they use in the rockets. Of course, you have to have oxygen to have fire. That's a chemical reaction. And you also have hydrogen. And as you know, hydrogen is very combustible. It carries a lot of energy. So water actually carries a potential lot of energy. And it has the oxygen to make that, the oxidize to make things happen in your body. And obviously we need oxygen to live and to do chemical reactions. So when that water gets in your body and it gets around a cell, it kind of rearranges itself so that it can make the oxygen and the hydrogen more bioavailable.
All right.
To do the chemical reactions. That's what it's really doing.
That's a great analogy because you're speaking to a Canuck hockey.
Yeah.
Very quickly, just because, we need far more time and we'll revisit this again. I'll have you back on. But let me ask you how and I'm looking at a bottle right here. I'm gonna open it up and I'm gonna try to open it up. Boy, that's really sealed. I'll have to do that later during the break. How is your water created? How is Divinia Water made?
The first thing we do is we purify it 16 times. So we purify it to the point where it's a medical grade water. In fact, it's above medical grade water. Then we run it through a distiller machine to actually distill the water after that. So you would think everything is gone after that. Except now, as I sent you one of these pieces of pictures I showed you, there's now nanoplastics in our water. And I'm talking about nanoplastics. And everybody's now drinking plastics no matter what. I don't care where your water comes from, you're drinking nanoplastics.
Even if it's spring water? Even if it's spring water coming from deep within the bowels of the earth? Okay.
It makes no difference where the water comes from. They found, close to 98% of the people in the world are drinking nanoplastics, period. So that means somehow you're building plastics up in your body all the time. So what we do after we've purified it 16 times, distill it, we then run it through another device, which is a distiller, but it's also a resonant chamber. That is, it resonates at the frequency of the OH stretch bond. Now, remember I talked to you about hydrogen and the oxygen, and the distance that those two guys are close together is called their stretch bond. So there's a distance between the oxygen and the hydrogen that are bound together. Just like if you're in a hockey arena, if the seats are close together, they're tightly bound. But if the seats are 6 feet apart, they're not so tightly bound, right?
Right.
So what we do is we put energy into that bond and we stretch it. And we make the oxygen and hydrogen still want to root for each other or root for the team for each other, but they're stretched. They're 6 feet apart. So that if, let's say, a pretty girl comes in between those two guys, there's going to be competition for it, right?
So now the oxygen and the hydrogen molecules are in an open relationship. Is that what you're telling me? Okay.
Yes.
I don't approve.
And for the girls, if there's two girls rooting and a good-looking guy comes in between, okay, so not to, be equal here.
All right.
So what happens is that if that oxygen and hydrogen, if either one of them sees something that's more attractive to them, they want to go do that. So they're in a very open, loose relationship. So the oxygen says, oh, I've got to go over to this amino acid and make it into another amino acid. And the hydrogen says, well, I've got to supply energy for it. That's what happens. And it's very loose. In fact, when we did the testing on this, we went to a materials science lab at Penn State under Dr. Rustin Roy. And we looked at it on the nuclear level, and we looked at the bonds and how tight the bonds were. And we found out the bonds in our water has the amount of energy in it that steam does, but at room temperature, or our water's at room temperature. If you heated water up to steam, of course it'll burn you, but it makes chemical reactions go a lot faster. That's how much energy is in our water. So at room temperature, we have a lot of energy in that. That's why when we tested concrete, we found out that it would cure concrete in 4 days instead of 28 days. And it cures 7 times faster. And on top of it, it cures almost twice as strong. And we did other tests with wine and beer and vodka and everything. We burned it in a gasoline engine. We could run 80% water, 20% gasoline and run it just as efficiently. So it has a lot of energy in it. That's also why we bottle it in that glass, because if we bottle it in plastic, it will actually dissolve plastic.
Oh, my word.
So
is that why I'm having such a hard time trying to open it?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I've opened it.
That isn't the reason. We want to make sure that those caps aren't good so no one can open it and play around with it.
And how does one consume this water? You just drink the entire bottle straight down? You don't pour it in a glass, you just drink it right out of the bottle, one bottle at a time?
Yeah, people will drink anywhere from 4 to 8 bottles a day of that. And after one of the things, I don't know if you've got it open.
I do, and I just took a sip.
Smell. I'm sorry?
I've opened it and I've taken a sip.
Okay. And it has no aftertaste, does it?
Zero. No, it's just wet. It's just wet and no taste.
Let's try smelling it, Richard. See if you can smell anything in it.
I don't.
You're right, you don't. After you drink this bottle, if you get a chance, go to your tap and smell it.
Right.
We have people so sensitive to water. People are so sensitive that people can tell if where it was bottled at, if someone had perfume in the room at that time when it was bottled.
Interesting.
We have people so sensitive that we had one gal down in Florida that was allergic to water, and she could not drink water, so she got IVs all the time.
I had no idea that was even possible.
Started drinking our water, and she was fine.
Okay, but let's face it. I mean, how practical is it for people to only drink this water? I mean, that would be cost prohibitive. Is there not a way that we could use this technology at the city's drinking or at the water plant and send this out and have this coming through all of our taps? Is that possible?
The answer, unfortunately, is no. Because there's so many problems between where the water is cleaned at the central city or at the central plant to where you get in your tap. there's lead pipes, as you probably know. There's plastic pipes. There's roots growing in there. There's just too many problems along the way. You really do have to just drink it out of the bottle. Now, it's expensive because of the shipping right now. Our major goal is to open these plants up in all the major cities, so you will be able to buy this at a very reasonable cost.
Right.
Be able to drink it all the time. Most of the people right now that are drinking it have health problems, or they don't want to have health problems.
If someone has health problems, give me a kind of a laundry list of things that Divinia Water can. I mean, obviously, we can't make claims that it heals this or it heals that. But anecdotally, what are people saying about Divinia Water? People who have health issues.
Okay, and thank you for making that clear. That I can make no FDA claims, and I am not making any claims whatsoever. All I'm relating is some third-party anecdotal responses that we've seen back to us. But a lot of people that have had kidney problems or have been on kidney transplants to receive new kidneys have returned back to health. People who have had liver problems that were on the liver transplant returned back to health. People who had hepatitis C returned back to health. People who were depressed that had suicidal tendencies, that cleared up for them. Parkinson's, we've got several people that have had Parkinson's that can't function no matter what medicine they get. When they drink this on a regular basis, they're totally functional again. We've had people with some cancer problems and whether they're fighting the cancer or whether they've gotten chemotherapy and they have side effects from the chemotherapy, it has totally and almost completely eliminated the side effects of chemotherapy and have reduced a lot of cancers.
Very quickly, because we're heading into a break, Stephen, how much water do you have to consume in order to see these health benefits?
Usually people drink 4 to 8 bottles a day and they see some health benefits within 2 weeks.
Interesting. All right, we'll take a quick time out, come back. Steven Sedlmayr, DiviniaWater.com, DIVINIA, DiviniaWater.com. We'll also meet Ralph Stanton, U.S. Air Force veteran exposed to plutonium, who has quite a story to tell. We'll come back and do just that in mere moments. Stay with us.
When you look at the sky, ever wonder if someone's looking back? This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
We are talking about water. It is miraculous. No question about that. Steven Sedlmayr is with us, DiviniaWater.com. I'm thinking, as we're talking about this, all the references to the living waters in the Bible, a Song of Solomon, a garden fountain, a well of living water and flowing streams from Lebanon. I think it is in John. Whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of this heart will flow rivers of living water. Is that what you're trying to create here, Stephen, the living waters of the Bible?
Yes. Unequivocally, yes. The Bible said water will cure, and water's been holy since the beginning of man. The Garden of Eden, there was the spring in the Garden of Eden. Jesus talked about being baptized all the time. John the Baptist had to baptize Jesus. Yes. Unequivocally, yes. And I'm not trying to create it. I will say that this was given to me. I didn't know what I was creating. I was trying to make pure water for my wife because the water that we were drinking was not doing us very good. And we had a commercial distiller, and it broke 30 times over 3 years. And I was the same as almost every other person on the face of the earth, that water is water. And until I started delving into this, finding out that water is very different, I had no clue to it whatsoever. And this has totally opened up my eyes.
I want to point out, too, just to establish your bona fides, you're no sort of backyard tinkerer, who's doing this basement full time. I mean, you invented fiber optic television. This is the forerunner, or the predecessor, I should say, to high definition television. You invented fiber optic television. I mean, you're a world class inventor.
Thank you. Yeah, I will admit that I helped with the Viking lander, the stuff that's on Mars up there. I was a rocket scientist when I was 16, 17 years old, did theoretical mathematics, and I was the first person ever to produce high-def TV of over 1 million pixels in the world. And my current, the patents that led to that are also the current patents that are being used for the flat screen TVs. In fact, in 1985, 84, I predicted that screens would be 4 foot in diameter and that you would be an inch or half an inch thick and weigh 50 pounds, and you would hang them on the wall just like a picture. And I was run over the barrel over that. But all of the hearings that were in front of Congress were based upon my patents and whether we should ever get into high-def TV or not.
All right. Yes, I think we've established your bona fides. So now you've turned your energy to water. Now, this is a short segment, so I got a couple of quick rapid-fire questions, and then when we come back, we're going to bring Ralph Stanton in here. Does water have intelligence?
Yes, but let me caveat that. It has a lot of intelligence, but not like you and I think cognizant intelligence. It has kind of a static intelligence, but that has to do with what I was telling you about the bonds and the stretching of the OH. It remembers that something caused that. It will go into a permanent state. So that it kind of distorts, and that distortion is what is the memory. Now, is it intelligent? Yes, it knows that if it's longer, if the bonds are longer, it's easier to do chemical reactions. If the bonds are tighter, then it knows it's harder to do it, or it is harder to do it. So it has this innate ability to be able to reconfigure itself to do chemical reactions. So in that sense, it is very smart.
Where do you stand on the work of the late Masaru Emoto, the idea that human consciousness has an effect on the molecular structure of water?
That is part of what I told you about the very quick structuring of water, or the arrangement of water. I'm very familiar with that test, and I know his son also. And we speak every now and then, every year at a water conference. And I'm not quite. Yes, it does. Let me tell you a great story about that. Dr. Rustin Roy did a test where he had a monk in Russia pray over a beaker of water in his labs at Penn State, and they arranged it via satellite. The millisecond that monk started praying, the water in his lab changed. And the monk kept chanting and praying over the water. And then when he stopped, that water went back to normal again. So I totally believe that human consciousness or vibrations can change water. The question is, how long does it stay?
Ah, interesting. Quick question before the break, and that is university studies. Have there been, for example, peer-reviewed studies on your water?
Yes, there have been, and they've been published, peer-reviewed. Now, interesting, we are going to start looking at doing medical clinical trials that prove what I say about this water being able to help the bodily functions. And we will be the only water on the face of the earth that could ever medically claim and prove that this water does what we say it's going to do.
There's that music. We'll come back. Steven Sedlmayr, DiviniaWater.com. The living waters? Perhaps. Back with more in a moment.
The truth is not out there. It's right here. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Steven Sedlmayr is the CEO of Divinia Water, DiviniaWater.com, 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 and his water is said to have the highest easy water signature, and it is also highly energetic. It is deuterium depleted and oxygenated at 102%. And he is joining us from Idaho. Now, let's bring in Ralph Stanton. Ralph is a veteran of the United States Air Force. He served in the Gulf War in 1990. And in 2003, Ralph was hired as a security guard for the Idaho National Laboratory. Then, in 2011, Ralph, along with 16 of his colleagues, were exposed to an uncontrolled release of plutonium while working on site at the INL. And after the accident, Ralph faced numerous health issues and legal battles and felt his and his family's lives were destroyed. And then, of course, he crossed paths with Steven Sedlmayr. Ralph Stanton, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. Thanks for joining me. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, Richard. Thanks for having me.
So, I gave sort of the thumbnail sketch there, the plutonium exposure. Just tell me a little bit about that. What happened exactly?
Well, first of all, I was hired as a security guard, but in 2007, I was rehired as a nuclear facility operator at the Zipper facility, which houses metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium, and also uranium-235. And so the day that I was exposed with 16 others. We brought in some plutonium plates, opened them up inside the work hood, and the work hood looks a lot like a salad bar, which is vented with exhaust ventilation, kind of sucks it through the back. Through ventilation, kind of like a vacuum. And anyway, we put the plates in there, and then we opened up what is called a clamshell. It's about a 6x12, two pieces of metal that screw together. And inside those, there are plutonium plates. They're about the size of a Hershey candy bar. And if you think about the chocolate as being the plutonium and the wrapping being the stainless steel cladding, you can kind of visualize what it might look like. So it looked like a stainless steel candy bar. So anyway... And
the ventilation system was not working properly, or how did the exposure occur?
Well, the ventilation system had not been working properly for up to a year. And then on top of that, they took out the contamination alarm that hadn't been working. They took that out due to the cost of replacement. And then, unbeknownst to us, they had the plutonium plates. They were warned almost 3 years prior to this accident that the plates were defective, and warned against the exact same scenario that happened to us by the independent review safety chairman, who retired just before.
We could do a whole 2-hour show just on this. Sorry, Ralph. We could do a full 2-hour show just on this, but unfortunately, I just have a few moments.
Yeah.
So after the exposure, what sort of ill health did you suffer?
I suffered radiation poisoning, acute radiation syndrome, vomiting, nausea, diarrhea. My lymphocyte, which is the white blood cells, were down to just under 50% of their normal levels. So I was pretty sick for a little while there. And as time went on, just got sicker, started having nosebleeds. Just wasn't feeling well at all. And then my wife finally said, "Hey, I'm going to take you to the doctor. We're going to get some tests done and see what's going on with you." And they ran a bunch of blood work on me, and they came back and said that my liver, my kidneys were not fun. They were failing, and my bone marrow, they were all full of this heavy metal. And
is it fair to say you were dying?
What's that?
Is it fair to say that you were dying?
Well, they did not say that. They told me that they were going to keep me as healthy as they could for as long as they could. I don't think that they ever, they never told me I was dying, but that's their exact words. So my liver, my kidneys were in the beginning stages of failure, and basically we're always taught that once the radionuclides, once they get into your liver, get into your kidneys, get into your bone marrow, there's no medical way that is known to get them out. And so that my mindset was just, just that I would try to keep as healthy as I could for as long as I could. I didn't think I had very long.
When did you cross paths with Steven Sedlmayr and his water?
Well, right about that time, because my wife had crossed paths with another lady who was buying the water for her mother and told us about Steve. My wife, being a very dominating lady and in charge of me, which is a good thing, I guess, but she told me that she said, "We're going to go by and meet Steve, and you're going to drink this water." At the time, I really didn't think that water could do anything like that, that it was going to help me. But I met Steve, and he took me out to his garage at the time, showed me the whole, looked like the Nutty Professor, and it was kind of quite a sight to see all the water setup that he had, and then the final product dripping, after all these different machines that the water was going through. And so I started drinking the water, and about 3 months later, they took my blood again and noticed that my kidneys and my liver had made quite a dramatic turnaround without any way of explaining it.
How much water were you drinking,
I don't know
Ralph?
what you're doing.
How many bottles a day? How many bottles a day?
I would drink probably a half a gallon to a gallon a day is what I was drinking. And so finally, after about 8 months, I was completely back to normal. Everything was back to normal. And so I let the secret out to my doctors, what I'd been doing. And they invited Steve to come by and give a little bit of a presentation, because medically they had never seen that. So it was quite a neat thing for my family to experience.
I'll bet. What about your colleagues at the INL? How many of them are still living? How many of them were put on this water regimen?
None of them, as far as I know, were put on. This wasn't done through the government. This was just done through me. The government, our employer, we caught them falsifying our doses, and so they pretty much got away from having any responsibility for it at all. Basically said that we caught the flu those, the acute radiation syndrome symptoms were the flu.
Oh my gosh! There must have been a huge class action lawsuit here.
Well, that's a 10,000 page novel by itself, Richard.
No question. Well, yeah, we'll have to do another show on that. But do you know the status of any of your colleagues' health?
Well, one of the guys that was standing next to me, and the reason why I don't know is because they fired me. I started asking them for medical and radiological information on me, and they would not give it. And I finally confronted them about what I had caught them doing, and they just fired me.
Okay, so you lost contact with your colleagues?
What was that?
You lost contact with your colleagues?
Right. Okay. There was one of them that was having a lot of respiratory issues. One of the guys contacted me, one of the 16 contacted me because he had 3 miscarriages. And after having 3 perfect kids, they had 3 miscarriages. He was told that he didn't get any kind of a dose.
All right. Now, because we're running up against the end of the show here.
Okay.
So Ralph, you're still drinking the water, but you're fully on the mend, full liver and kidney function. And what about the bone marrow?
The bone marrow, I'd have to get another bone marrow biopsy to check it, but all of the blood markers that are connected to the bone marrow are right where they should be.
This is fantastic
Along
news.
with, the perfect functioning kidneys and liver.
That's terrific. Steven, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. So are you still producing this out of your garage?
No. We've moved into, actually this is our second building, a commercial building now. We've raised some money with the help of some friends. And we are continuing to increase the production of this. Our total goal is to be able to make factories in a box where we build these into shipping containers. We ship the containers to a city, open them up, and we start producing the water right there in the city.
So to sort of decentralize it so every city would have its own living water supply, manufacturing plant.
Yes, I want everyone in the world to be able to have this right in their backyard.
This is pretty exciting stuff. We're going to have to do this again. We're going to do a 2-hour show on this. It's not enough time. But Steven, this has been absolutely fascinating. And again, it's DiviniaWater.com. DiviniaWater.com. Ralph, thank you for telling your story. This is amazing news, and I'm so happy to hear that you're on the rebound. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard,
thank you
very much.
All right, Steven Sedlmayr, DiviniaWater.com, and Ralph Stanton, U.S. Air Force veteran, and was exposed to plutonium and now seems to be fully on the mend. All right, my thanks to Ian Robertson back. Oh, wait a minute. No, we've got another hour to go. We have Rosemary Ellen Guilley on the other side. Stay with us on The Conspiracy Show.
From Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Thanks for inviting me into your home, your long-haul trek, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed rec room, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Hello and welcome to all of you listening in on our flagship station here in Toronto, Zoomer Radio, AM 740, 96.7 FM. All of you checking us out on one of our affiliate stations across North America. The podcast, of course, don't forget the new one, Conspiracy Unlimited. Drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Those of you who normally check us out on the YouTube channel, just a programming note, no live YouTube stream tonight. That will resume next week. And unfortunately, just due to the icy road conditions, I'm doing the program from home. Albert and Ryan are staying home where it's safe. So, again, no YouTube stream tonight, but we will post this show on the YouTube channel within the next several days, and we will resume the live YouTube stream next week. However, and wherever you're listening, I bid thee the warmest of welcomes, and I thank you for your fine company. Well, it is that time of the month when we get a visit from one of our faves here, a dear friend of the program, Rosemary Ellen Guilley, paranormal researcher, investigator, the author of over 65 books, 9 of them major encyclopedic works, and she has a brand new one out, co-authored with the travel psychologist Michael Bryan, and this one is called The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness. Rosemary, welcome once again. How are things in snowy Connecticut?
Not much different than up there for you, Richard. We've had snow, ice, rain. The roads have been messy. Joe and I are staying in this weekend.
Same here. Yeah, this is the kind of winter I remember as a kid. Just lots and lots of snow. And it seems to me we've sort of gotten off easy over the last several years. But this is more like the ones I remember.
I would agree for New England here in Connecticut. We usually get a fair amount of snow, and it has been light for several years, and now this is more like what I would consider normal. You know, I've been in the East Coast area for, about 30 years now, and I would say this is a typical winter.
I like it, actually. I like lots of snow. Now, you're staying put, I'm staying put, but this is a book about travel and the experience, the paranormal experiences that people have while traveling. Now, this is sort of the second in this theme, correct? You wrote one previously about the same sort of thing.
Yes, our first book was called The Road to Strange. That's sort of the series title that we're giving it, and it was Travel Tales of the Paranormal and Beyond. And it was about how travel in general just opens us up to extraordinary experiences of all kinds. Now, for the second book, not everyone is actually on a trip when they have their UFO experience. We're extending travel into an interdimensional area because some people are right in their own backyards when they have an amazing sighting of a ship or a close encounter with something, or they have a bedroom visitation. Both Michael Bryan and I have been involved in ufology for a long time. In fact, Michael was so heavily involved in MUFON for a good number of years that they started calling him the MUFON ambassador. And in his travels around the world collecting unusual stories from people, a good number of them fell into the UFO and alien category.
Now, the book is divided into 4 main sections. I Know What I Saw, Mystery Lights and Craft, Alien Encounters, and then High Strangeness. Just walk me through quickly each category with a brief explanation.
I Know What I Saw is very important because this involves sightings. It could be mystery lights in the sky, close encounters with craft, and witnesses find that they're often dismissed and ridiculed. And the mantra in ufology has become for years, I know what I saw. You know, it was not fog. We have one story from New Zealand, an amazing UFO encounter with a film crew in an airplane. And the official explanation was, which is captured on film, and the official explanation was, it was reflected squid boat lights off clouds. You know, just the crazy explanations that debunkers come up with. So this is a very important category because so many things fall into that. The mystery lights and crafts, that's a very common experience where people are just out, they're out in the countryside or driving, or they're out in their backyard enjoying the night sky, and suddenly something that doesn't seem to be of Earth origin intrudes upon them. In alien encounters, we advance to actual encounters with non-human beings, beings who come in craft and get out, have some sort of engagement with people, or people see beings inside of craft, or they're visited in their bedrooms. We have some really scary stories of abductions, and we also have stories of people who say that their encounters have been beneficial. and that they're participating in some sort of hybrid program that's going to be for the benefit of everyone. And then we just really had to include high strangeness, which is all the weird things that seem to go along with UFOs and aliens, missing time, portals that seem to open into other realities, men in black, the strange entities that visit people and threaten them when they've had encounters. And all of these things are part of the big synergistic picture of what happens to people when they come in contact with something that does not seem to be earthly.
One of the interesting themes, particularly in the I Know What I Saw section of the book, is the why me factor. People were wondering why they were chosen to see a particular craft, and almost as if there was an intelligence being directed at them. They may not have seen it, but they felt it. And one such case actually leads off the book from a woman by the name of Anita Sowles, remembering a case over 50 years ago in the town of Los Molinos, California. Tell me about that.
Well, it was a family. They had a dairy farm, and one night they saw a craft, not real close to the farm, but about a quarter mile away. And Anita's brothers took off. They wanted to find out what was going on. The family reacted in different ways. She had a sister. She and her sister went out and actually saw the craft, and Anita stood practically right under it. It was absolutely immense because it did come very close. Her father didn't want anything to do with it. He sat at the dining room table continuing to eat his dinner. Oh, it must just be a government thing. I'm not going to think about it. And her mother was too scared to even contemplate it. So Anita gets a very close look at this craft and observes its size. It's round. It's got rotation to it. There are lights around the edges and colors. And it's interesting that you said the why me factor, and in fact we do have that. It's like, why me? Why was I singled out? This is a theme that crops up over and over again, where people feel that somehow the experience was meant for them, or they noticed something, and whatever intelligence was behind it noticed them noticing and responded in kind. And as the reader goes through the book, this theme crops up over and over again. Why did I have this experience? So for Anita, it was really a life-changing experience. This is another theme that you will find throughout the book as well, that even with just a sighting of a craft, it doesn't have to be like a close encounter face-to-face with alien beings. It can change your life forever about what is out there. People often feel very insignificant, very powerless, that there's something far greater, more intelligent than they are, and that these intelligences or beings have the ability to find them whenever and wherever they want.
And in her case, she went to bed every night filled with fear and anxiety that this craft was going to return, perhaps take her. And it's like she prayed every night, if you come and take me, please leave my family alone. How long did that last?
Well, it lasted for a good number of years, and even after the major anxiety, it's almost like post-traumatic stress syndrome. Even after the main anxiety has subsided, it's always there in the back of somebody's mind that the world isn't quite the same as it was before they had their experience, and some people feel their safety zones, kind of violated. Now, in Anita's case, as far as we know from her account, nothing like that ever happened to her again, but she was always considering the possibility that it might, or since they seemed to know where she was, something else might happen. They might come back and she might have a different kind of encounter. And she also found that other people weren't interested. This is a theme, especially in the section I Know What I Saw. They try to talk to their family members. Their family members don't want to talk about it, or they deny it, or shrug it off as, non-UFO. Friends just kind of laugh, and Anita had a very good friend who said, oh yeah, you're really into that stuff, aren't you? Ha ha. And so the witness then, the experiencer, feels totally minimized and isolated. And that's a very scary spot for a lot of these people to be in.
For sure. There's also a possible element here of missing time. Her two brothers took off in the van in hot pursuit of this craft, or these craft. I think she said there were 5. And I don't think they caught up with them, but she calculated the trip there and back should have taken a certain amount of time. They were out much further. So she suspects there may have been some missing time.
And there might very well have been. I think it was about 45 minutes or so that were unaccounted for. And nobody wanted to go down that road, so to speak, to consider what might have happened. Now, we have another story later on in the book where 4 hours of missing time occurred to a couple of sisters, and one of them underwent regression and discovered that quite a horrific abduction had taken place. So people have just kind of a natural blockage, and it's understandable. It's like, well, something weird happened, but I don't want to know anymore, because if I learn what really happened, then I'm not sure I can deal with it. And that was the case here.
Now, your co-author on this project and the one previous, Michael Bryan, also known as the travel psychologist. As a psychologist, how does perhaps his interviewing skills, what does he bring to the table in terms of his discipline and his interviewing skills when he's talking to some of these witnesses? I don't know who interviewed who in these cases.
Well, almost all of the accounts in the book are from Michael's files, his world travels and his encounters with people, where he has interviewed them about their travel experiences of all kinds, including ordinary experiences as well as extraordinary. And as a psychologist, he's looking for how are you engaged in this experience? What was the effect on you? How did you accept, deny, integrate? And one of the things that I brought to the table with all of these stories is sort of an analysis commentary at the end. And we did this in the other Road to Strange book, too, where we put the story into context with other similar stories and classic cases from ufology. How does this compare to what's already out there in the known literature? And I think that perspective really helps the reader, especially the reader who's new to this territory, navigate through this territory, this uncharted territory that clearly indicates that human beings are experiencing intelligences from other origins.
All right, Rosemary, we'll take a time out. When we come back, we'll dial back all the way to 1931 in Central Texas. This is a tragic story of a young boy who was actually beaten for telling his parents about a mystery light he saw in the sky. Rosemary Ellen Guilley, co-author of The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness, right here on The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. Stay with us.
Keeping an eye on the New World Order. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Welcome back. Rosemary Ellen Guilley is with us. We're going the full hour, and her new book, in which she co-authors with Michael Bryan, is The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness. Talk about being punished. We mentioned that earlier. Being punished, or at least being dismissed, for talking about UFOs, or marginalized. But here we have a very tragic case of a young boy who's actually beaten. Tell me about T.L. Murdoch.
Well, he lived on a cotton farm in Texas, and this event actually took place in 1931. It was many years later by the time Mr. Murdoch really told his story for the first time because of the way he was treated by his only family members. But it was a spring day. He was about 4.5 years old. And we really can't discount experiences from children because they have legitimate experiences just like adults do. But he's outside, just enjoying the day, and he sees something up in the sky that is very unusual. He sees this round, he described it as a round, shiny silver object, and it was sort of hidden by the clouds, and then it's unhidden by the clouds, but it's clearly something that's not an airplane. He said it remained stationary, and he said it looked to him like a big shiny eye that was just staring down at him. So he said he, even at 4.5 years old, he knew that it was not an airplane, and how is it just staying fixed in the sky? So, he went home, and first he told his mother. And what did she do? She backhanded him for telling a lie. And this just absolutely amazed him, and it was quite a blow. And she said that, it was just his imagination, and then she criticized him for his dirty clothes, being outside. In other words, she just didn't listen to him and just assumed he was making something up. So then he thought that maybe his father would listen. And his father got out the old-fashioned, belt form of discipline that was very common back then, and gave him a beating for lying. And he said it was really a brutal lesson that at that very young age that you could be punished for telling the truth.
I wonder, I shudder to think about how many instances, that occurred, and that people were so traumatized, the retribution for telling their parents or someone else what they saw, they were beaten, in return. How many lives were utterly, destroyed because of that?
It's hard to fathom, but I'm sure it has happened many times over. And we have other comments from experiencers in the book telling their stories about how they were ridiculed, and it leaves quite a stigma on people, especially if their story leaks out in the public, gets into the media, and then they've got the general public jumping on them as well. And this is a very peculiar condition here in well, it's not just ufology, Richard. We see it in the paranormal as well, that on one hand, there's a clamor for, if this stuff is out there, let's see the evidence. Let's hear it from the witnesses. And then when witnesses come forward, what happens to them? They're just leaped upon and ridiculed and shredded for their credibility. They're made fun of. They're called hicks. They're delusional. They're drunk, liars, whatever. And it's no wonder that people often remain quiet about their experiences.
Well, if you're not traumatized by the sighting or some encounter, you end up being traumatized by either the ridicule or an actual physical beating in this tragic case. You mentioned earlier the New Zealand UFO sighting, in which again the witnesses were jumped on, and they tried to explain it away, saying it was squid boat lights. And this is an interesting case because, as you point out in the book, it's not one of the most dramatic UFO sightings necessarily, but it remains one of the best documented.
Well, it is because of the film footage that was captured, and was entirely unexpected. In fact, J. Allen Hynek said the case was very unusual and significant because of the film footage. And this was a case where a UFO had been seen by pilots and other people over New Zealand, and a film crew was sent up in a plane basically just to recreate the experience for a documentary. Nobody was actually expecting to come face to face with a UFO. And while they were up in the sky trying to do this recreation, they actually had a real sighting of a mystery light, and it was captured on film. And there was a little bit of anxiety among the crew because there had been a recent case where a pilot had disappeared. A pilot and his craft had disappeared after allegedly seeing something unexplained in the sky. And so everybody's nerves were quite on edge. But the fellow who was doing the filming, a man by the name of David Crockett, this really changed him. And, he's got his camera there. He's filming this thing off the plane that they're seeing, and he's hardly believing what he was seeing. And then to be met with dismissal, these ridiculous explanations, he almost became a missionary after that, to get his film footage out there and to spread the gospel, so to speak, that these are real events. There is hard evidence. It can't be just dismissed. Bruce Maccabee looked at the footage and declared it to be legitimate. But
he's an optical physicist.
He is, yes, and he had worked for the Navy. I think Bruce is retired now, but Bruce was often called as an expert to examine photographs and film footage. And so that's how David Crockett's life was changed. And, like anyone with a missionary sort of goal like that, you're going to find some people who will believe you and a lot who won't. But because of the film footage that was captured, this remains one of the more significant cases on record, even though it's not one of the most famous.
The Chicago O'Hare UFO incident of 2006 is in the book, and here there's lots of denial going on here. I believe it was over Concourse C, I think it was the United Airlines concourse, if I'm not mistaken, this sighting. And United Airlines, lots of denial, coming them out after the fact and so forth. Even though I remember this story, it ran in the Chicago Tribune. I spoke to the reporter, whose name escapes me, we did a TV episode on the O'Hare UFO episode, and the online edition of that story was the most popular news story in Trib history, the online version. But here we have a UFO enthusiast and a trained field observer who sees this remarkable event, and of course then the denials start coming in. Tell me about that.
Well, the primary witness was actually a field investigator for MUFON. And so she had training in what to look for in sighting cases and interviewing witnesses. And she's looking out her office window one day. This was, as you mentioned, in 2006. And she sees an object that looks to her like a UFO. It doesn't have any wings. And it's moving off in a southeasterly direction toward U.S. Cellular Field, and she knows it's not an airplane, so immediately, because of her background, she's considering this must be a UFO, and she calls to one of her colleagues to come over to the window and look at it. And this is another thing that is a common theme in these cases, where there might be multiple witnesses who see it and agree on what they see at the time, but then there's denial later. It's like, oh, well, you thought it was a UFO, but I don't know what it was, or I didn't see that. That's really what happened to her. And so she did a little bit of triangulation on it. She had about a 30-second total sighting time on this, and discovered, that, in her estimation, it was genuinely an unexplained object that she saw. But her colleague said she didn't believe in UFOs, and so therefore it couldn't be that. And there are a lot of people who just have this kind of blind, shuttered, I don't believe in that stuff, so therefore no matter what I see, it can't be that. And this is also very frustrating to eyewitnesses, because then the person that they're looking to for corroboration isn't backing them up.
I should clarify. I'm in error. This was not the O'Hare UFO incident. That was in November of 2006. This was in what you're describing was in August 2006. This is a separate incident entirely. My apologies.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about that particular case.
No, but same year, within months, and another sighting in Chicago. We're coming up on a break, but I want to get into the next section, which is the mystery lights and craft. And there's an interesting illustration here by one of the witnesses, and Billy Pecca draws this craft that he saw in September of 1976. Looks like your typical, flying UFO, domed on top, flat on the bottom. The part in the middle rotates and so forth. Tell me about this sighting. We'll get it started now, and then then I'll have to jump in and we'll continue after the break. But tell me about the Billy Pecca illustration.
Well, this took place late one night in September 1976, and Billy was watching TV, and he noticed that the TV goes on the fritz, and all the appliances go on the fritz. It's like there's some big electrical outage going on, and this often is a precursor to a sighting as well, especially if it's a visible craft. And so he goes outside and sees this very strange craft up close over his farm.
All right. We'll pick it up on the other side. We'll talk about the Billy Pecca sighting. And we'll continue our conversation with Rosemary Ellen Guilley, co-author along with Michael Bryan of The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness, right here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
Exploring theories, uncovering facts, and offering a different view of the universe. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
And we are back with Rosemary Ellen Guilley. Again, the book, The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness, co-author Michael Bryan, a.k.a. the travel psychologist. We were talking about the Billy Vincent Pecca sighting, and this is outside of a trailer house on the edge of town in Colusa, California, in 1976. Quite an interesting illustration here. You were describing that earlier, and he talked about how the experience really interfered in his life. A lot. Tell me about that.
Well, I did want to mention also about the appearance of the craft, because he talks about how it looks like there are rope-like cables that dangle down.
Oh, yes.
And there are many descriptions that people give where they're seeing something that looks dome-shaped or saucer-shaped round, and they see protrusions issue from the side, like ropes or cables or pincers, and start to come down to the ground. And he saw this as well. Now, he went and stood, in all there were 3 craft that he saw, but the main one, he stood directly under it. He said for a good 6 minutes, and he looked up inside of it. And he said it seemed to have like this ceramic kind of finish to it. There was sort of silver and white and purplish kind of light. And he could see deep inside the craft, but he couldn't see any beings in it, but he did sense that there was an intelligence to it. And the only thing that he could think of was, oh my gosh, I need to protect myself and my family. And of course, people often have the irrational thought that if they have a rifle or a gun, for example, that if they go in and get it, they're going to have some sort of protection, when that's not going to be any protection against this at all. But this craft starts to back off, and it starts to head over to neighboring properties. And so he rouses his wife and his daughter, and he says, we've got to get out of here. And they jump in their pickup truck, and they go to a neighbor's house and report what they've seen. And they're worried about the one neighbor in particular that this craft seemed to have another interest in. And interestingly, a couple of the people that they contact don't seem to be all that disturbed by it. The husband had been a pilot, had seen a lot of unusual things. The husband and wife had slept through this whole experience, and the wife said, oh, well, we would have liked to have seen that too. They weren't at all alarmed by it.
And I mentioned earlier go ahead, yes. Well,
Billy found, like a lot of others, that he was ridiculed for this. Now, the case was investigated quite thoroughly by APRO.
Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. APRO.
Right, the Lorenzens. They're both gone now, and
right.
APRO no longer exists. But they did an extensive investigation. They sent people to interview Billy. He had nightmares, repeating nightmares. The dreams would always start where he saw the craft and ended where it just disappeared in the sky. And there's this sense of vulnerability. And he was advised to undergo hypnosis, but he was really frightened to do do that, and so he didn't. But it is one of the more extraordinary cases on the record. The official there was a big blackout in the whole general area that was explained away naturally, but Billy really thought that it was the presence of the UFOs that had caused the blackout, because he said as soon as they were out of the vicinity, all of his appliances came back on. And this is something that we find with many cases as well, that cars fail, appliances, equipment fail, and then as soon as the craft is out of the area, everything is back normal and running again.
Right. Officials said there was a disturbance at a substation northeast of L.A. or something. That's how they explained it away. The other interesting aspect of the book is where we were talking about, the why me factor, and why I've always wondered this. I've never seen a UFO. And then I know people that see them almost on a monthly basis. It's almost as if they choose who they'll reveal themselves to. And there's the case of Norma Jean Conroy, who is a flight attendant. And it seems as if this UFO decided to reveal itself to her and her husband, but no one else. This took place back in 1979 while she was working for United Airlines.
Yes, and it was in Hawaii, and she and her husband were driving back home. They had separate cars. They'd been out. They were in separate vehicles. They were driving back home, and she notices these strange lights overhead, and they're very low. She knows it's not a plane. For one thing, it's not on the flight paths that she's familiar with. This whatever it is flying way too low for a commercial aircraft. And so she stops her car and gets out to look at it, and her husband stops his car and looks at it too, and they see this huge thing going overhead. And it's also traveling very, very slow, which would have been uncharacteristic for an airplane as well. So none of the things lined up to explain it away as a commercial aircraft. And they did sort of go through their minds, a checklist. Well, maybe it's a helicopter. No, it's not a helicopter. And it just goes slowly over and has sort of a humming sound to it. There seems to be an intelligence behind it, and it heads out towards sea, toward one of the other islands. I've
got to jump in here, Rosemary. We're going to take a quick time out. We'll come back, and we'll continue on with this story of the flight attendant and her husband. I'm back with more right here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
The world is being pulled over your eyes. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
We are back with Rosemary Ellen Guilley, co-author of The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness. And just before the break, we were talking about this flight attendant and her husband. Back in the late 70s, she was working with United Airlines at the time. They saw this huge craft, slow-moving craft. And you just pick it up from where we left off, Rosemary.
Well, it does start to pass over, and then it did some strange aerial maneuvers. Another common characteristic we find in these cases where people say they see lights and craft do things that a known craft can't do. And this thing made a 180-degree turn and came back and made some other unusual movements, and then passed over and went out toward Molokai and disappeared in the clouds. Now, other people, this wasn't night, but nonetheless, here's two people who have stopped by the road, and they're looking up in the sky, obviously puzzled by something. Does anybody stop and want to know what's going on? No. And this also is a characteristic we find, that others seem to be very uninterested in finding out what might be going on, even when they're told to look up. And so they actually, when they get home, she calls one of their friends who's an Air Force pilot and describes what they'd seen, and is there any possible explanation for it? And he doesn't have one. And it isn't in the news. If anybody, she is kind of mystified how no one else could have missed this. Surely some of the people in the houses that this thing passed over might have observed it as well. Nobody seems to have reported it because it never landed in the media. And so witnesses in this case often start second-guessing themselves. You know, did I have a real experience? What really happened? If no one else saw it, no one else reported it, then why did I have this experience? And I do think that people have different, I guess you would call it psychic antenna to unexplained phenomena and extraordinary phenomena and alternate realities. And there are individuals, as you mentioned, Richard, that have even frequent sightings and encounters, and other people might even go their whole lives having none or maybe even one. And it seems that they're just tuned into what I would say might be a different vibrational frequency where they experience these things, which I believe are around us all the time.
In the alien encounters section, there's a case of three sisters. Again, we go to California. And missing time, about an hour and a half. They're on their way. I believe they were coming from their grandparents' place, traveling back, three sisters, back to their parents' home. A trip that should have taken them, was it an hour and a half, and they were gone for 4 hours or something. So they have this big chunk of missing time. That's the point. Of course, their father doesn't believe them, believes that they were out partying somewhere. Anyway, they eventually get none other than J. Allen Hynek involved. Tell me about this case.
This was a particularly terrifying case for the primary witness who underwent the regression that I mentioned a little earlier. And what happened with the three sisters was that there was really only one way to get home, and they had to go over a certain road and a certain bridge, and they wind up with these 4 hours of missing time, and their father doesn't believe them. They even get a map out to determine that there's no way they could have gotten lost and meandered around. They wound up going over, they suddenly realized that they were going over the same bit of road territory that they had gone over before, and 4 hours had gone missing. And so the one sister was, her name was Judy, was pretty rattled by this, and she wanted to try and get to the bottom of it, and someone recommended that she contact J. Allen Hynek, and he in turn put her in touch with other investigators. He suggested that she thought maybe she had been through a time warp. One of her friends said, "Oh, you had like sort of a time slip," and Hynek didn't think so. He thought that maybe an abduction had taken place. And so she undergoes this regression and has to relive a really horrifying experience where she finds herself out of the car and aboard some sort of craft, and she's undressed on this what appears to be like a stainless steel table with a sheet over her, just like a medical examining room. And there are other people in the room, other humans, including a young woman who seems to know who she is because she addresses her by name. And so there are these beings coming in and out. They have masks over their faces. They're not very tall. They're only about 5'6". But then this being comes in that absolutely terrifies her, and she refers to him as the witch doctor. And he's quite tall. He's 6 to 7 feet tall. He has this bulbous, almost insect-like head, not a praying mantis, but kind of an insect-like head. She said it was like you could see all the veins in him, and they were red. You know, his skin is almost like translucent, and there's something very evil and sinister about him. And she panics when she sees this being, and he approaches her. And this other young woman who's lying on a table next to her in the same room says, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry, Judy, don't worry." And so she is subjected to, some sort of examination, and not only by the witch doctor, by these other beings. And this witch doctor entity seems to be the entity in charge. And that's often the case that we find in these shipboard recounts, where there is a different-looking being who seems to be in charge. And she said she felt like a guinea pig, like a lab rat. And this is another theme for these kinds of encounters. People say that they're treated like animals, like we might put a rat on a lab table and do some sort of examining lower life form. She can't communicate, and other people say they can't communicate with these beings. There's telepathic communication going on, and they're getting impressions from the beings, but they're not getting any information. It's just like they are literally a lab rat. And this experience for her was so terrifying that when she was undergoing the regression, she really had to be brought out of it because it was just too emotionally stressful for her. And in attempting to revisit the experience for more information, she even asked to skip over that part because she just could not deal with the terror of this experience and this horrible being that she called the witch doctor. Well, her two sisters, so what happens then is that when the experience is over, the smaller beings take her back, and suddenly she's back in her car. And she said they just sort of shoot her into the car, and she's back behind the steering wheel. And she sits there in a daze for quite a while, and then at some point, her other two sisters reappear in the car. And her two sisters were not interested in delving into their experiences. They had, the more common reaction of, I don't want to know, because if I do know, then I might not be able to handle it.
You mentioned these insectoid-looking creatures, and these aliens that look like insects or praying mantises often appear in these abduction accounts. There is one in the book particularly harrowing. I mean, the one you just discussed was most frightening. But there's a gentleman in London. This is going back, I think, 2001. And again, the classic sort of praying mantis overseer in this abduction account. Tell me about that.
This was a series of abductions that went on for a number of years, and Jim contacted me some years ago and told me his account. He contacted other researchers as well. He did not give out his last name, and the experiences involved mostly these horrific praying mantis beings, and then also some smaller beings that seemed to be their sidekicks, which he described as cloaked and sort of beetle-like. And here again, it's the why me factor. Now, Jim said that he had some experiences earlier in life, and we often find this in the background of experiencers, that there are indications that they've had earlier encounters. But at any rate, the primary experiences start in 2001, and he's living on the outskirts of London, and he wakes up in the middle of the night to find this, what appears to be a praying mantis-looking being in this little beetle-like thing by the side of his bed. And he thinks he's dreaming. He shuts his eyes and opens them, and then he realizes he's not dreaming. And this experience then initiates periodic visitations from these beings. Sometimes it's a little cloaked being who comes by itself, and sometimes it's praying mantis. And they mess around with him. They get inside of his head. He has strange physical effects. He passes out. He wakes up bruised and like he's been run over by a truck. He starts to believe that he's been abducted, but he has, no recollection of what's going on. And it gives him literally all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And they're quite horrific. He sees these things come through walls. They're very sinister. They have needle-like instruments, the praying mantis does. And they go on and off for years. And sometimes he gets a little bit of relief for a while, and then the experiences start up again, and he's powerless to stop them. And he begins to have a more engagement with them. And he describes one set of experiences where he was shown, he was taken aboard like a craft and then shown the planet Earth and places on the planet and things that were going on, and describes in some detail what he says is an underground facility in the U.S. where there's thousands of aliens, including these praying mantis-like beings, and they're hostile, they're malevolent, they have no good intentions toward human beings. And so he's given like this information and even previews of what might happen in times to come. But they're not real like other beings in other experiences, they're not real forthcoming about what their agendas are, who they are. It's like, we'll get from you what we want, but we're not going to tell you anything other than what exactly we want you to know. And so finally, he arrived, after years of these traumatic experiences, he begins to notice that when he spends more time inside of London, it seems to put up a barrier against these beings. And that if he's outside in a more rural area, they seem to have access to him, but if he's in a big noisy city, where the energy is a lot different, he seems to have some protection to him. And the last any of us heard from Jim was around 2008, where he said he had moved to the city. He was still suffering from what he said was post-traumatic stress, but he wasn't being bothered anymore. Now, that may have been the case that he found some way to sort of block the access, but it could also be the case that the beings were done with him. We have so many accounts from abductees who say, the encounters went on as long as they wanted them to, and when they were done with me, they stopped.
Right. And in other cases, it seems to be almost generational. Rosemary, we are out of time. I want to point out, though, before we go, that at the end of the book, there's an appendix that includes an interview that Michael Bryan did, your co-author, with the late, great J. Allen Hynek, so people can look for that. And how do they get a hold of The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness?
It is available on Amazon and in ebook, on Kindle, Nook, iBooks, and Kobo.
Well, congratulations to both you and Michael, and thank you for hanging out with me for another hour, Rosemary. Always a pleasure.
And thank you, Richard. You stay warm now.
I'll do my best. Out to shovel the driveway yet again. Rosemary Ellen Guilley back next week with a brand new program. Thank you to Ian Robertson. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.